Great. Thank you so much, Axel and the other organizers for, first of all, organizing this, this seminar series and for inviting me. And okay, I'll just get started. And because it's, at least the presentation part is short, I'll be brief, of course, and I'll focus on a lot on the why. What is the motivation for what we are doing? Then I'll also show results, and the price of it will be, of course, that I'll say less about how we do the calculations and so on. Of course, there's plenty of time for questions at the end. Whatever you want to hear about, you're welcome to ask. If you have any like misunderstanding, what is this symbol you just used, please interrupt and ask. All right, great. So we all, we're all in ecology for various reasons, but if you ask a lot of ecologists, one of the main reasons they came into ecology is this incredible richness we're all aware of the number of species we see in different places, but also of survival strategies of different types of interactions between species and so on. And you all know these things. In order to try to have some grip on all this complexity, what we, sorry, just a second. What we do is often we use simplifying theories of different kinds, and there are many out there. Just to give an example, neutral theory, saying, okay, there are maybe 700 species of flowers out there in some rainforest, but maybe in terms of functionality, maybe it's all just one flower of different colors, and if you're colorblind, then you only see one flower, and then the problem is, of course, in that sense, much easier. Another kind of simplification is what I call here a single axis. So it could be a niche, for example. So there are many birds or various species of birds, but the reason they can coexist is because they live in different parts of the tree. There are different trade-offs, arcade trade-offs, competition colonization, many other suggestions are out there for these different axes. The idea is that there are a few of them that allow, for example, for coexistence. Okay, and a slightly different type of simplification that people use, I want to go to dynamics. So suppose that we see abundance fluctuations as a function of time of some species, and we want to know what is the reason for these abundance fluctuations. Is it because essentially we're looking at a single species that fluctuates in its abundance because of the external conditions that vary in time? Maybe it's just temperature differences or something like that. Maybe it's not due to external differences, but maybe there are 3 or 4 very dominant species. They're doing some, I don't know, chaotic motion of these 3 or 4 species, and the other 50 species are just enslaved to that motion. So our question is, how do we identify and understand ecological communities that are not one of this partial list that I've given here? How do we know that we are looking at something that is different from these options? What might something like that be? Maybe we have not one axis, but I don't know, 50 niche dimensions. Or if we're thinking about plants, instead of competition over a few abiotic resources, we know that there's many other things going on, signaling, and there's also microbial communities and fungi involved, and there's a cow that walks, and every time it eats one plant, it steps on another, and so on and so forth. So how do we identify that we're looking at something that is complex in that sense? Okay, so let's dive into the setting. So what I'm going to do is use as an example a very specific setting. That is, first of all, I'm going to look at assembly either of a single community, maybe I will say a word about meta-communities. And assembly is, as you know, there's a species pool of species living around in a region, and then there's one location, and these species migrate into this community and then fight it out. And the interactions, the dynamics within this single location, I'm going to take, again, very standard Lotka-Volterra dynamics for the sake of this presentation. And I'm assuming you all have seen it to some degree. Basically, it's a set of, if there are S species in the pool, then it's a set of S ordinary differential equations coupled together. The important thing for us is this, most important thing for us is this coupling term alpha ij, which is a matrix of S by S. And actually here, technical note, I'm taking the abundances divided by the carrying capacities so that the diagonal of the matrix is are ones. But other than that, there's a lot of freedom in the interactions. If we have, say, 50 species, we have over 2,000 numbers in this matrix of interactions. There's a lot there. And that will be an important part of what I will be talking about. All right. So the idea is this: and this is sort of the crux of the whole argument, or the important thing to think about. Suppose I have one interaction mechanism, one niche axis or whatever it is, then I might see something like this matrix on the right. The colors are just the strength of the interaction, positive, negative, and so on. And it might look very ordered, okay, because it's defined by a small number of parameters per species. But if there's many, many, many things going on, then maybe I will see something more like the matrix on the left, with no conspicuous order that I can identify. And so maybe what can I do? Maybe a good bet would be to take the numbers in it and replace it with random numbers. Okay, that's the suggestion, and okay. And then here's one way, a simple way to take these numbers. So you basically take independent random variables. You want to allow some level maybe of symmetry. So if you want a very symmetric matrix or a completely symmetric matrix where the effect of species I on species J is equal to the effect of species J on species I, but other than that, you don't impose anything else. We assume here, the one thing we're assuming is that each species has a large number of non-zero interactions with other species. Okay, this C is the number of links, and we assume it is large. By the way, 6 or 10 is already a pretty large number for our purposes. Okay. And what do you see if you put these equations in a computer and you just run it and you see what happens? Well, one thing you might see is you start with all species there, present, and then some species you see their abundance here in the y-axis as a function of time, and different lines are for different species. You see many species going extinct essentially down to the migration floor, and the others relax to some stable equilibrium. Okay, that's one thing. And then you can do this again and again, and the important thing is that during the dynamics you do not change the matrix alpha, and you can even repeat the same simulation with different initial conditions, but with the same interactions alpha, and you might get again and again the same result or different results. Okay, so alternative stable states, or another outcome that we see is chaos. Okay, you basically see persistent fluctuations forever and ever. They're very unpredictable. And it's something like what we're seeing here. These are 3 selected species out of a large community, just to give you an idea of what happens. And you see that species die, then you don't see them for a while, and then they bloom, and so on. All right. So in our work, I think we've been pursuing 2 large directions, and I'm only going to talk about one. The second one, let me just say in a word, just give you an idea what the other thing I'm not going to talk about is. And that is the following idea. Okay, interactions, we took the interactions in the pool of all species to be random, independent, random numbers. But the species that are able to coexist stably in a community, they can't just have a random matrix of interactions because then more species will go extinct locally in the community. And so that means there are additional constraints on the matrix of the subset of species that are able to coexist. And we calculate what the these minimal statistical biases are, and we actually also compared it to measured interaction coefficients in an experiment in a plant community. And okay, I can talk about it more if you're interested later. Okay, so let's get to to what I do want to talk about. And let's see the time. Okay. So one thing about this model that I just described and defined completely for you before, this assembly process, is that we have a lot of analytical results for this model. So, for example, we can calculate completely and with no free parameters properties of the equilibria, the diversity, the total biomass fluctuations, response to perturbations, all these things. You can see here examples with comparisons with simulations. One interesting thing is that for a large enough community, these community-wide properties are set deterministically. And what I mean by that is that the species richness, for example, will be, say, 50 plus minus 3. Okay, so it will be almost a fixed and well-defined number, so with small statistical fluctuations. Other things we can understand are dynamics, which I'll talk about later, and interaction patterns, which I talked about before. And the idea is just, again, going back to motivation, is not necessarily that we'll use these equations for anything, these analytical equations, but to really see that we understand completely what's going on, at least in this little theoretical lab of ours in this specific model. All right. So one result that, interesting result that repeats itself is that in all these different calculations and results that we get for the properties of the entire community, the full distribution, the details of the distribution of the alpha ij's doesn't enter, okay? Really what you're left with is only 3 relevant parameters that enter all the calculations. One of them is this correlation, the level of symmetry of the matrix, and the other 2 are combinations of the number of links, non-zero links per species, and the mean and variance of the interactions, okay? And this has been extended to many other models by collaborators of mine. And another point is that so far we haven't discussed any structure such as functional groups, trophic levels, and so on, but an extension can be made to those cases at the price of introducing more of these parameters. Okay, but the important thing for us is that really for this model of ours, there are really just 3 parameters that enter everything. And now when we have 3 parameters instead of, I don't know, 2,000 parameters, we can start plotting and understanding the qualitative behavior of the system in this 3-dimensional space. And so what we see is a number of, again, qualitatively different behaviors depending on where you are in this space of these 3 parameters. And one of the behaviors we see is one where you start the simulation, you run the dynamics, you reach a fixed point, and again, you run the dynamics with different initial conditions and the same matrix alpha, you get to the same fixed point at the end. So this is, again, a simulation, abundances as a function of time, and this is what you get. Another behavior that we see is one where there are First of all, this is in the case of symmetric interactions. So alpha ij is equal to alpha ji. The matrix is symmetric. What you see is very, very, very many stable fixed points. Okay, and by very, very many, I don't mean 3. I mean it could be 100 million. Okay, very, very many alternative stable states, but still, it's not that every subset of species is a fixed point. It's a tiny subset of all the possible subsets of species that can actually form a stable equilibrium community. All right. And the next point is that these different regimes in this space of parameters when they're crossed, the transition is sharp. And what do I mean by that? So for example, this transition from a unique fixed point to many fixed points, what you see here in this graph at the bottom right is as we go up this red arrow that you see here, what I measure is the fraction of systems that have a unique fixed point or that have many fixed points, the fraction that have many fixed points. And so if the system the pool has 100 species, then it's this blue line, it grows continuously. 100 species in the pool is, I don't know, 40 species in the community, and you see this continuous growth in this function. But as the diversity grows, as the number of species in the pool grows, this becomes a sharp transition. Okay, we go from 1 fixed point to 100 million fixed points by a small change in the parameters. If you like, it's a bit like water turning to ice exactly at 0 Celsius or 32 Fahrenheit, if there's anyone from that side of the ocean. Okay, right. So now turning to asymmetric interactions. Let's say that alpha ij and alpha ji are independent numbers. All the matrix is independent random numbers. Then what we see is when crossing from the unique fixed point, we see chaos. And this is the chaos I mentioned before. And again, this crossing happens at a single point. It always happens at the same point. If you change the parameters, for example, increase the diversity to increase the number of links, or increase the variability in the interactions, any change like that would do that. What changes continuously once you cross the transition is the strength of the fluctuations. So how much the abundance of each species fluctuates. Well, it starts with small fluctuations, almost imperceptible around a fixed point, and grows as you continue into this chaotic regime into larger and larger fluctuations. Okay, so in this sense, this is a continuous transition. All right, I want to give you just an idea of where this is coming from. So here's the idea, very roughly. So there's a species pool and we have this community. Of course, invasions would increase the species richness, more species would be inside. Competition would push species out. And so there's some diversity that is selected by this balance between invasions and competition. And that's this blue line. And the question is, well, once you, in invasions and competition, select this diversity, is the potential fixed point at that diversity, is it stable or not? If it is, you have equilibrium, if not, chaos. And the reason that the transition is sharp is that, remember that the diversity, we said before, is almost a fixed number with very small fluctuations. So you always get chaos on one side of this, one part of the parameter space, and you always get fixed points on the other side. And in fact, a unique fixed point, okay? The red line is the stability bound of a fixed point. Okay, the last thing I want to say before I wrap up is to say, okay, for this specific example of this high dimensional chaos, or high dimensional persistent fluctuations, what tells this behavior apart from other options that you could you could suspect if you look at a system and see fluctuations? So one thing that I mentioned is that as you increase, for example, the diversity of the system, say you have an experiment and you can keep adding more and more species, you see continuous growth of the size of the fluctuations, okay? Not something that you would see if you have a single species driven by external environmental fluctuations. Another thing is that the different species, as the diversity increases, their fluctuations are almost independent. The fact that this one goes up has nothing to do with the other one, and so on and so forth, okay? Again, if you have environmental fluctuations, if you have an increase in temperatures, some species might like it, some not, but once there's a heat wave, you would expect many species to respond at the same time. Here they respond almost independently, okay? Similarly, if there's, like I said, 3 or 4 species that are performing some low dimensional chaos and affecting all the other species, you would expect to see many of the species responding together, unlike what we see here. And finally, this, while it looks, very messy, but it's not neutral. So each species does fluctuate around a different average abundance to which it keeps returning. So if you average over a long time window and then wait and average again over a time window, you will see the same abundance for each species. Okay, so meaning that each species will have a fixed abundance and it will be different between the species. And for me, the big question is, can these things, differences be used on empirical data? And if so, what kind of empirical data? All right, I'll summarize. What characterizes these high-dimensional, high-diversity communities? I talked about few relevant variables that fix everything, deterministic outcomes for system-wide properties such as the total biomass, diversity, and so on. We don't know what a single species will do. We know what the community will do. And I talked about these sharp transitions. And there's many, many more things. I haven't spoken about resource competition, behavior, effects of space, another completely different phase, which I have not discussed, and these interaction patterns that I mentioned at the beginning. Okay, I think that's it. My time is up. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Great presentation, Guy. I have some doubts about, first of all, do you assume that C is connectivity, I think?
Yes, yes.
Is greater than 1. And I think that in many cases it's much lower than 1.
So this is, sorry, this is the absolute connectivity, not the ratio of the number and the number of species. So this is the absolute number of connections, average number of connections per species.
Okay. So
yeah, that's one of those small misunderstandings. Yes, so absolutely, yeah, by definition, it will be, if it was the normalized one, it would be smaller, much smaller than 1. But I'm assuming just that each species in absolute numbers has, I don't know, 8 or 10 connections per species. In order for the analytics to work, let me emphasize that, if you have only 3 or 4 species, a lot of the phenomenology will be the same, but not the exact calculations as we did them. Yeah, okay, thank you, this is important, absolutely.
And well, another thing is that I was wondering about what happens if you have stochasticity, in the sense inner stochasticity, not produced by environmental factors.
Yeah, so demographic
stochasticity. Yeah, that's
absolutely.
right.
Absolutely. Okay, so a lot of things can happen with demographic stochasticity. It really depends on what you're looking at, under what conditions, and so on. So let me give you an example. In the where is it? When I mentioned these many fixed points, okay? Turns out that when you have so many fixed points, in this case at least, many of them are very close to marginally stable. That means that you can rather easily float around from one fixed point to another, what that basically means, or concretely means, is that you change some of the species, some come in, some go out, and so on. And so you have this ongoing exchange of species due to demographic stochasticity. So this is an example of a place where demographic stochasticity is could be very interesting and important to what happens. Let's see. When you have the chaos, well, it depends. If the absolute numbers in each species, these abundances in absolute terms, are large numbers, then it might be that the demographic stochasticity would not matter very much, because it scales as the square, the size of the demographic noise scales as the square root of the absolute number of individuals, whereas the fluctuations that we are discussing come from, here, let me put the Lotka-Volterra equation here. They come from the fact that each species senses the fluctuations of all the other species, okay? So this is something that is proportional to the species abundance, okay? So these are much stronger fluctuations. They're like environmental fluctuations in many senses that can overwhelm the demographic noise when the absolute numbers are large, right? When there are 10 to, I don't know, 14 microbes, then maybe demographic stochasticity is less important, okay? But absolutely in different cases, it can matter, yes.
Okay. You could have a situation where you have low numbers for some species and very, very, very high numbers for other species, like in a food web.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
Well,
yeah, the only thing I can say is that these are very interesting questions. We haven't solved all of them, and I'm not claiming that we have. I think, if anything, the only thing I want to say is that I think we have more of the tools to treat these problems along the lines of what I've shown. But I don't have an answer for all scenarios at the moment.
All right, some other people want to say something, please raise your hand.
Nadav is raising a hand. Sorry. Nadav is raising a hand, yeah?
Yes. May I ask something?
Yes.
Okay. So, Guy, first of all, thanks for the talk. And you said that abundance variations are growing with diversity.
With the what? With
diversity.
Yes.
This was one of your conclusions.
Again, sorry, I don't have, with a combination of things, diversity is one of them, or rather the number of links per species, yes.
Again, so I didn't...
okay, maybe you finished the question, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm just I want to ask, so in your conclusion slide, you said that abundance variation are growing with diversity. Do you mean the diversity on the island or the diversity in the mainland?
Right. So yeah. So really, what matters is, let's put it this way: you vary things, and then everything varies together, right? You can change, say, the variation in the variability of the interactions, and then the diversity would grow, and then without changing the pool, the number of species in the pool, or you can increase the number of species in the pool, but keep these different sigmas the same, and so on and so forth. So there are many options, and then, the good thing is that we have an analytical understanding of what does and what doesn't matter. And the bottom line is that what matters for this is this parameter here, okay? So take it as you will. One way, I was just saying, one way that you might experimentally perhaps increase this number, this sigma here, is by increasing diversity, therefore increasing C, the number of links per species, perhaps. You could change the mean, you could change the variance. All of them should have similar effects, okay? I think that's the fair answer.
Okay.
So if nobody wants to jump in, maybe I can. This is Henri from Cape Town, and I'm very sorry to have joined you very after the talk was basically over, but I was unable to do so earlier. I always find Lotka-Volterra a very bad model from a biological point of view. Do you have any comment on that?
Yes, absolutely. So one of my comments is that there are more subjects I did not talk about, and one of them is resource competition models. And I'm as much a fan of resource competition models as anyone. Maybe I'll say a word about that. The effect I ended up discussing the most is this transition from equilibrium to these high-dimensional chaos as parameters or diversity or whatever it is changes. And the thing is that it's known that there can be chaos in resource competition models, but much of the work on these high diversity models has been done using the MacArthur model. And it's a technical point for those of you who happen to know a bit. The MacArthur model is a specific model with specific assumptions on functional responses and so on. And that specific model always reaches an equilibrium. And so you can ask, well, what's going on? And our answer, and it's a new paper coming out very soon, is that if you perturb the MacArthur model by just a little bit, okay, add a bit of interaction not mediated through the resources, or change the resource, the functional response, functional responses and so on, you do see chaos appearing. And in fact, it appears once you cross the competitive exclusion limit, when there are more species than resources. So again, I just chose the Lotka-Volterra model because it's one model that everyone knows. We do not have to stick to it. By the way, in these models, in these resource competition models, all the other things I mentioned also are relevant. They are also apply. There are very few relevant variables, which are now things that have to do with low moments of the interactions with the resources, with the resource intake. There are, again, these deterministic outcomes for system-wide properties, and as I mentioned, there are these phase transitions. So all these things should apply in these cases as well. Yeah, thank you for this. This is an important issue, I think. Yes.
All right. Yes. Other comments, questions, please.
So I just wanted to say that Julio Alcantara had a question on the chat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's. Can you read it to us?
Yeah. Hi.
Oh, great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, I just was wondering whether these phase regimes can be partly due to changes in connectance and partly due to variation in the mean interaction strength. And particularly in the case of connectance, we know that as you increase it above 1, you get a giant connected component that can change completely the dynamics. So what do you think?
Yeah, so it's absolutely, okay, so first of all, as I said to the question below before, what I called C here, and maybe I should have called it small c or something else completely, is the absolute number of connections per species. So it's a number that for me never goes above 1, and it can be much smaller than 1. So this has nothing to do with the appearance of these giant components, these hubs, and so on. It's a very, very different phenomenon. Okay, so for that, we are perfectly sure and understand. And again, what does matter, we know exactly mathematically what causes the transition, and it's this thing that I was trying to say in words here. Okay, this idea of crossing a stability bound, and this is borne out exactly by simulations. This transition and all the phenomenology of this transition is borne out exactly in simulations. And again, therefore, we know that it's, again, these 3 numbers. And again, I'm sorry, I should have said this. I should have changed the notation. C here is, the absolute number. What you were referring to is C over S. which can be here up to 1 or a very small number. Is that clear? Is that, does that answer your question?
Even if it is just the number of interactions divided by the number of species, it is intimately related to connectance. It is just link density, and again, it is when it grows above 1 in random networks, we know that things change. So
here it never grows.
Sorry?
Here it's up to 1. We never allow it to grow above 1. Okay? It can be very small, it can be up to 1, it never goes above that. Okay? There are no giant components. It's either a full, a full matrix or a sparse matrix. There's no giant components here. Okay? It's a very simple story in that sense.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry. Hello. Thank you, Guy, for your talk. I guess my question was also related to this C value and when we get into resource dynamics, if we think of the traits that so you have this species immigrating into the system, and the assembly process will involve a certain structure of the connectivity patterns, and also it will itself influence the strength distribution, right, of the community. So I wonder whether you can comment about that. How does this constant, I mean, in light of course, I understand this is a useful basis to then discuss resource competition or resource models based on traits, etc. But I was wondering whether this assumption of this, maybe a misunderstanding of this constant C.
Yeah, no, the constant.
Just to perhaps clarify, in an assembly process, I think the most interesting aspect would be that the strength of the interactions remaining, the strength of the connectivity patterns, etc., will be emergent, right?
I could not possibly agree more. And so, yeah, so first of all, C here is not the number of connections in the assembled community. It's the number of connections per species in the pool. What happens then, the assembly process does its thing. And let me say more. This thing that I mentioned before about how you marry coexistence with this assumption of randomness precisely goes to these questions of, for example, will species that compete less be chosen in the community? Okay, there's a selection by the assembly process of less competitive species. That is something that is we see and we can calculate exactly. And in fact, the interesting thing is that it's not just shifts in means or stuff like that, or simple shifts.
No,
it's very subtle.
A structure. It has to be a structure.
Exactly. So we actually calculate and understand some things about this structure, and maybe in 2 words, species that are very successful in a community that that can live at high abundance, even if there are many other species around them. These species form sort of, if you can call them cliques or diffuse cliques, where they compete less with each other. Okay, and this is something that that we understand again on a quantitative level. Okay, so I won't get into it now. Maybe this is just an advertisement, but just to say I agree with you completely. And finally, last point is that these things are also relevant to resource competition communities, assembly, where the links that are chosen, selected by the assembly process, have additional structure, okay? But that is a result of the assembly process rather than an input that we put from the beginning. We don't want to assume that. We want to see how the assembly process acts as a filter.
Of course, I understand there are two kinds of assembly. One would be this kind, which you are doing by immigration. Essentially, you are selecting by immigration from your pool. And the other would be where you allow an evolutionary process. And
right.
I think it was, but in any case, yes, you have emergent properties. And I guess I was inquiring about those in relation to your parameters or your space here, or the dynamical regimes.
So let me know if the answer is clear to say that both things happen at the same time. So the community that is selected and the interactions within this community are shifted and biased in all kinds of statistical ways. And these transitions that I was talking about and the diversity that is selected, all these things are there at the same time, and we have a handle on all of them at the same time. Okay, the fact that one happens does not go against the other.
No, of course. What I'm asking is about the relationship of those, right? So essentially, what are the implications when you are above this transition for the structure that implies this coexistence of diverse communities?
Okay. Now I think, I see what you mean. So of course, when you go into the chaos, the chaotic regime, then even defining who's inside and who's outside the community becomes a more subtle matter, because species come in and go out. However, I can say that I don't know if I'll find it now, but the shift, the biases that we see that the assembly process does to interactions continues into this chaotic regime. There's not a sharp transition in those properties, okay? Those don't change very sharply, but they do continue to change the process. Again, as long as you are even able to say, okay, who's inside and who's outside, because things come in and go out all the time.
Sorry to interrupt. There was one person, Noelle, had her hand raised a long time, and now she disappeared. Does Noelle want to?
Oh, sorry. I'm still here. I was just waiting.
Okay, great. Yeah, fire off.
Yeah, I was just wondering in terms of empirical data. So if I follow your model well, so like the interaction strength as well as the symmetry of the matrix and the variance are basically they're key. That basically dictate the probability of having chaos. So when we think of interactions are not the same over time, by that I mean like when young individuals will have different requirements than older ones, and so on, or depending on resources they might shift on what they use and so forth. And then if we increase also the diversity, we also have a higher probability of having asymmetrical matrix. And then when we combine this with that increased probability of chaos, and then when we add stresses and environment changes, it feels like no stable state is achievable. So I'm just wondering, how does this kind of modeling fits empirical data, or if we have ecosystem apex states, how can you explain that from your model?
Okay, so there's many questions folded into one. And okay, so first of all, this model does not have age structure, okay? And again, you start with a simple model and then you work from there. And I think, the one answer I can say is, no, we haven't done age structure, and I'm sure there's a lot of interesting things hiding, for example, in age structure or in other structures that you can put into the system. So maybe that's my best answer to you at this moment, the most honest forthcoming answer. Apart from that, I think that what we see here is that whether or not you see chaos, you know, is chaos more general than equilibria, stable equilibria, or not? Well, I think both of them can be robust regimes of a specific ecological community. Okay, it depends on everything. Okay, I don't think there's, what we learn here is that there's not one outcome, one dynamical outcome of all runs or of all systems. There are not a huge selection, but there is a selection of I don't know, 5 different dynamical outcomes that are possible for us. Okay, so again, if you ask, well, would you start fighting? Well, is H2O, is it in liquid form or in solid form? Do we always get ice or do we always get water? Well, it depends. Okay, you can get water and you can get ice. So, and apart from that, I think it's an empirical question. Will you be more here or there? And that I just don't know. Okay, I simply, we're not at that stage. Again, and I would be very interested to hear from people here on possible places where we might be able to identify these different behaviors or these transitions in data. I'm very open to that question. So yeah, I don't know how much that answered your various questions.
No, it does. Like, it gives me a lot to think about, essentially. Like, it's very interesting, and like, well, the more I think about it, I feel like I see, like, especially recently, I've seen like a lot of talks about community structures, meta communities, and like all these new concepts, new like modeling like approach to understand all this diversity that we see in communities. But at the same time, like, sometimes it feels like everything is a bit dichotomous. It's like we either have like some assembly patterns and there's this one, or we have like this other extreme. But like, from what you said, like the outcomes are like almost endless. So like, is it not like more valuable to try to see to model the continuum of outcome? Like, I mean, like, I don't know if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I think one of my messages is that no, on the qualitative level, the options are not endless. There is a rather small number, at least in this, right? There are, like you're saying, age structure and many other things. I don't know, but there's actually a small number of things that, you know, water does 8 different structures or something, or 9, or who knows exactly how many. That's a lot, but that's not everything possible. Okay, so there is a level of generality in there. It's just not that everything is just one outcome. That I don't think is a good guess. That's not my guess. Okay,
let's leave it here.
Mm-hmm.
There may be time for one very quick questions from Curie. Curie doesn't want to speak anymore.
I think since Geza's older, even though I did get suddenly much
you want
older.
to briefly fire off a question? Very quickly, because I have to wrap this up.
No, okay. Leave me out. My question was long. Forget it.
Okay, so then I have to, very much before people leave, I have to announce the next talk will be by Eva Kishti in 2 weeks from now, same time. And it is about evolution of traits in space, something completely orthogonal, different from what we heard about today. And now I have a very brief question to Guy also. Or one comment and one question. The comment is there are other ways to recognize these particular states that you identified, and one of them is if you look at the species richness in the chaotic state through time. My understanding from our modeling, from our calculations, is that the species richness doesn't change even if you change the size of the external pool. So you would expect a turnover in time and a constant species richness. And interestingly, that's what empiricists see and are very excited about. And I think there is a strong link. And now my question is, my question is this. My question: you publish a lot in physics journals. Can you explain us the rationale behind this?
That's an interesting question. Maybe for I'll be happy to talk later with you about that. But I do want, it's important, your question. No, but seriously, the first question, what you said is, I just want to say, because this is an important thing and we're running out of time. No, I do want to say that this is not against what we're seeing. Absolutely not. It's exactly the same thing. And the point is that when you increase what you're doing in your simulations, which is a perfectly fine thing, is you're increasing the species pool, maintaining the interaction strength the same. And if you look at our equations, they agree with you completely in the sense that as you increase, if what matters is...
I think that's, I wanted to go to the observability. This is something that you can see in nature, and you see it a lot.
But it agrees completely with what we're saying.
I have no doubt about this.
Okay, yeah,
right.
So we're not...
I'm so sorry. I'm very impressed, first of all, about the discipline of all people who contributed to the discussion. Thank you very much. I'm sorry that we have only 1 hour time. Maybe we should have 2. But then again, people need to have dinner and stuff.
Alex, could you leave it open if anyone else wants to stay later and ask?
Okay, we leave the Zoom open.
If anyone wants to stay, I'm happy to stay.
That's okay. But I will officially now close it, and I hope I see many of you in 2 weeks from now with another crazy story. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Oh, so I have to leave very soon. Short announcement. If anyone's interested in presenting, let us know, please. And we're very happy to discuss that. Okay, thank you.